What if the real danger in your home doesn't arrive loudly, but slips in through laughter? What if the words you call jokes are quietly shaping the atmosphere around you? Some sentences don't sound evil, they sound familiar. They wear humor, sarcasm, and casual tone, but leave wounds behind. Over time, those words teach hearts to close and trust to disappear. Not every door is opened by anger. Some are opened by mockery. And once you hear this, you'll never speak the same way again. When we talk about words, we often treat them as harmless sounds that pass through the air and disappear. But anyone who has lived inside a relationship, a family, a home, knows that words linger. They shape mood. They create memory. They set tone. A home is not just built with walls and furniture, it's built with language. With what is spoken casually at the kitchen table, muttered under the breath in frustration, repeated so often it starts to feel normal. Most of the words that affect us the most are not dramatic or intentional. They're offhand. This place is a mess. Nothing ever works. I can't take this anymore. We say them without ceremony, without meaning to cause harm. But repetition gives words weight. And over time, those words begin to act less like expressions and more like agreements. Agreements with chaos, with hopelessness, with fear. Homes absorb what is spoken inside them, not in a mystical sense alone, but in a deeply human one. Language creates emotional climate. If irritation is spoken daily, tension becomes the default. If despair is voiced often, discouragement stops feeling alarming and starts feeling familiar. And once something feels familiar, we stop resisting it. That's how doors open quietly, without intention, without awareness. What's dangerous isn't a single sentence said on a hard day. It's the pattern, the normalization. When words that carry negativity become the background noise of life, they begin to shape how people behave toward one another, how they interpret silence, how they respond to stress. Fear doesn't need an invitation when it's already being named aloud. Conflict doesn't need a trigger when it's already expected. We underestimate how much power there is in casual speech because it feels honest. We confuse venting with truth-telling. But honesty without awareness can still be destructive. Saying, "I'm just being real," doesn't protect us from the consequences of what we repeatedly affirm. Words don't just describe reality, they rehearse it. And what we rehearse, we eventually live. This is especially true in the home, where defenses are down, where children listen even when no one thinks they are, where partners absorb tone more than content, where the spirit of the place is formed not by grand declarations, but by everyday language. A home filled with constant complaint begins to feel heavy. A home filled with constant fear begins to feel unsafe. Not because something evil was invited intentionally, but because peace was never protected deliberately. Awareness is the turning point. Not silence, but intention. Not pretending everything is fine, but choosing language that doesn't amplify darkness. This doesn't mean denying pain. It means refusing to give pain the final word. It means understanding that what you speak repeatedly becomes what you tolerate, and eventually, what you host. When you begin to listen to your own language, you reclaim authority. You notice which words drain the room, and which ones steady it. You realize that restraint is not repression, it's wisdom. And that changing your words is often the first act of reclaiming peace. Your home follows your voice, so choose words that don't open doors you never meant to walk through. We don't realize how quickly the mind learns from what it hears most often, especially when those words come from our own mouths. Repeated language doesn't just express how we feel in a moment, it trains us in what to expect next. When certain phrases become habits, they quietly script the future before it arrives. And the mind, always eager to make sense of patterns, listens carefully. Think about how often fear is spoken as if it were a fact. Something bad is going to happen. I just know this won't work out. Every time things get good, it falls apart. These sentences don't feel dramatic, they feel cautious, responsible even. We tell ourselves we're preparing for disappointment, protecting ourselves from being blindsided. But what we're actually doing is rehearsing danger. And the mind, once trained to expect harm, begins to scan for it everywhere. This is how fear moves from emotion to atmosphere. It stops being a reaction and becomes a lens. Conversations tighten. Joy is met with suspicion. Peace feels temporary, fragile. When fear is spoken often enough, it no longer needs proof. It becomes the default explanation for everything. And once fear feels normal, it invites companions' tension, control, conflict, unrest. Not because they were summoned intentionally, but because they feel familiar in a fearful environment. What's striking is how quickly the body responds to repeated negative language. The nervous system learns to stay alert, always bracing, always waiting. Over time, this constant state of expectation erodes safety, not just emotional safety, but relational safety. People stop relaxing around one another, misunderstandings escalate. Silence feels threatening instead of neutral. The home becomes a place of vigilance instead of refuge. And here's the paradox. The more we speak fear to protect ourselves, the less protected we actually become. Fearful language doesn't prevent pain, it multiplies it. It keeps the system activated, the heart guarded, the imagination locked into worst-case scenarios. It narrows the future down to a single story, one where loss is inevitable and peace is temporary. This isn't about blaming yourself for moments of worry. Fear is human, but repetition is formative. What we say over and over becomes what we believe, and what we believe shapes how we behave. We start making decisions from anxiety rather than wisdom. We react instead of respond. We confuse vigilance with strength, and slowly, without realizing it, we build a home where calm struggles to breathe. Awareness interrupts this cycle, not by forcing positivity, but by slowing down speech, by asking, is this a fact, or is this fear speaking? By recognizing when language is no longer informative, only reinforcing. The goal isn't to deny reality, it's to stop rehearsing catastrophe, to let uncertainty exist without filling it immediately with dread. When fear loses its voice, it loses its grip. When language shifts from prediction to presence, the atmosphere changes. There's more room to breathe, more space to listen, more capacity to handle difficulty without inviting chaos to take up residence. What you repeat becomes what you expect, and what you expect eventually becomes what you live with. Complaining feels harmless because it sounds like release. We tell ourselves we're just letting off steam, just naming what's wrong so it doesn't stay stuck inside. And in small doses that can be true. But when complaint becomes a daily language, it stops being a release and starts becoming a culture. Not just around you, but within you. And cultures, once established, are very hard to shift. The problem with habitual complaint is not that it acknowledges difficulty. It's that it normalizes dissatisfaction. When the same grievances are spoken again and again, they stop sounding like signals and start sounding like facts of life. This is just how things are. And once something feels permanent, we stop engaging it with curiosity or hope. We endure it. We tolerate it. We let it drain us slowly. Complaints don't usually change circumstances. They change atmosphere. They lower the emotional ceiling of a room. Conversations flatten. Energy thins. What could have been a moment of connection turns into a ritual of shared frustration. And over time, this shared frustration becomes a bond. Not a healthy one, but a familiar one. People connect over what's wrong rather than what's possible. What's especially dangerous is how complaint disguises itself as honesty. I'm just being real. I'm just saying how it is. But truth without direction becomes stagnation. When complaint isn't paired with reflection, action, or meaning, it doesn't move anything forward. It keeps everyone emotionally parked in the same place, revisiting the same irritations, reinforcing the same sense of powerlessness. In a home, this dynamic is particularly corrosive. Children learn what to expect from the world by listening to how adults talk about it. Partners learn what matters by noticing what gets repeated. When complaint dominates, gratitude struggles to find language. Appreciation feels naïve. Hope sounds unrealistic. Not because these things aren't true, but because they aren't practiced aloud. And here's the subtle cost: peace doesn't leave all at once. It leaks out slowly through tone, through sighs, through conversations that circle the same frustrations without resolution. Eventually, calm feels foreign. Silence feels uncomfortable. The home becomes noisy not with sound, but with dissatisfaction. Complaining also creates a strange illusion of control. If we can name everything that's wrong, we feel less vulnerable to it. But this is a false sense of safety. Constant complaint keeps the nervous system activated, always alert to flaws, always scanning for the next irritation. Instead of resting, the mind rehearses what's missing, and what's missing grows larger in our awareness than what's present. This doesn't mean we stop speaking about difficulty. It means we become intentional about how we speak it. There's a difference between naming a problem and living inside it verbally, between expressing frustration and building identity around it. Awareness begins when you ask yourself, is this moving me toward clarity or keeping me stuck in reaction? When complaint is replaced with discernment, something shifts. Discernment asks better questions. It looks for meaning. It opens space for response instead of repetition. And with that shift, energy returns. Peace doesn't have to fight for airtime. It's invited back into the room. Complaints repeated daily don't empty the pressure. They teach it where to live. There are words that don't shout. They don't sound angry or dramatic. They arrive quietly, almost casually, and that's what makes them dangerous. Words like whatever, who doesn't matter, I don't care. On the surface, they feel like peacekeeping, a way to avoid conflict, a way to step back before things escalate. But emotionally, they are not neutral at all. They are withdrawals. And when withdrawal becomes a habit, it doesn't create calm, it creates distance. These words signal disengagement. They tell the people around you, and eventually yourself, that you've stopped investing, that curiosity has been replaced with resignation, that connection feels too costly. And over time, a home where people stop caring out loud becomes a place where people stop reaching. Not because love is gone, but because effort feels unanswered. Dismissive language is often born from fatigue. You've tried to explain. You've tried to be heard. You've repeated yourself so many times that eventually, you choose silence over disappointment. And in that moment, whatever feels like relief. It lowers the emotional volume. It avoids another argument. But what it really does is close a door. Not slam it, but quietly lock it from the inside. The danger is that disengagement doesn't stay selective. You don't just stop caring about that one topic. The nervous system learns a pattern. Caring leads to frustration, so caring less feels safer. And soon, emotional flatness becomes the strategy. You show up physically, but you retreat emotionally. You coexist, but you don't truly meet. In families, this is especially painful because it's contagious. One person withdraws, another follows. Conversations become transactional. Affection becomes functional. The home still operates, but it no longer breathes. There's no space for vulnerability because vulnerability requires belief that what you feel matters to someone else. What's striking is how often disengagement is mistaken for maturity. I'm choosing my peace. And sometimes that's true. But peace that comes from shutting down is not peace, it's numbness. Real peace allows emotion to move without overwhelming. Numbness stops emotion altogether. And when emotion is blocked, resentment doesn't disappear, it settles. Dismissive words also erode trust. When someone hears, I don't care, often enough, they stop bringing their inner world to you. Not out of spite, but out of self-protection. And slowly, intimacy thins. Not because of betrayal or conflict, but because of absence. The absence of engagement. The absence of curiosity. The absence of repair. And here's the paradox: the more disengaged a home becomes, the louder the internal noise grows. Anxiety increases. Restlessness sets in. People scroll more, distract more, leave the room more often, not because they're busy, but because stillness feels uncomfortable. When connection is missing, the home loses its sense of refuge. Reversing this doesn't require grand speeches or emotional overhauls. It begins with choosing presence over avoidance in small moments. Replacing whatever with tell me more. Replacing it doesn't matter. It's hard for me to talk about this, but I want to try. These aren't dramatic changes, but they reopen channels that had quietly closed. Caring is not weakness. Engagement is not an invitation to chaos. It is an affirmation that what happens here matters, that the people in this space matter. And when that belief returns, so does warmth. So does safety. So does life. A home doesn't lose light through conflict. It loses it when people stop turning toward each other. There is a particular kind of language that doesn't just wound in the moment, it reshapes the emotional climate of a home. It's the language of blame. Words like, you always, you never, this is your fault, they feel powerful when spoken, almost clarifying. They give structure to chaos. They assign responsibility. But emotionally, They don't resolve anything, they harden positions. They turn partners, parents, children into adversaries instead of allies. Blame is seductive because it gives us a sense of control when we feel helpless. If I can name the culprit, then the pain makes sense. If I can point to you, then I don't have to sit with my own fear, disappointment, or grief. But blame is not truth, it's a defense. And when it becomes the dominant language in a home, it creates an environment where everyone is bracing, not listening. What blame does is shrink curiosity. The moment you say, "you always," the other person stops hearing you. Not because they don't care, but because they're now busy protecting themselves. The nervous system goes into threat mode, and once that happens, learning stops. Empathy shuts down. All that remains is survival. Over time, blame creates roles. One person becomes the problem, another becomes the judge. And these roles are incredibly difficult to escape. Even when behavior changes, the story lingers. This is who you are, and nothing erodes hope faster than feeling permanently defined by your worst moments. In homes where blame dominates, people become experts at hiding. Children hide mistakes. Partners hide feelings. Everyone learns that vulnerability is dangerous because it can be used as evidence later. And so honesty disappears, not because people are deceitful, but because safety is gone. Blame also has a way of inviting shame, and shame is corrosive. Shame doesn't say, "I did something wrong." It says, "I am something wrong." And when shame enters a home, it doesn't stay contained. It leaks into how people see themselves in the world. Confidence erodes, joy shrinks. The home becomes a place of performance rather than belonging. What's often misunderstood is that removing blame does not mean removing accountability. Accountability is relational. It asks, what happened between us? Blame is isolating. It asks, who caused this? One opens dialogue, the other shuts it down. There is a quieter, more courageous language that can replace blame. It begins with ownership. I felt hurt. I was scared. I didn't know how to say this differently. These statements don't absolve responsibility. They redistribute it in a way that invites repair. They keep the relationship central, not the ego. When a home shifts from blame to responsibility, something remarkable happens. People soften, defenses lower, mistakes become moments of learning instead of lifelong sentences, and trust, real trust, has a chance to rebuild. Blame is loud, but it is not strong. Strength is staying engaged when it would be easier to accuse. Strength is choosing understanding over winning. Strength is remembering that the goal is not to be right, but to remain connected. Because a home doesn't become unsafe when people fail, it becomes unsafe when failure is met with condemnation instead of care. There is a final kind of word that quietly opens the door to chaos in a home, and it often sounds the most innocent of all. It's the language of contempt disguised as humor, the jokes that sting, the sarcasm that cuts, the laughter that lands just a little too sharply. "I'm just kidding. Can't you take a joke? Relax, it's not that serious." But something is always serious when it repeatedly wounds. Contempt is not anger. Anger can still care. Contempt has already decided that the other is beneath consideration. It's the eye roll, the mocking tone, the subtle dismissal. And when contempt enters a home, respect leaves quietly, without a fight. What makes contempt so corrosive is that it erodes safety while pretending to be playfulness. The person on the receiving end starts to doubt their own reactions. Am I too sensitive? Did I misunderstand? And slowly, they begin to shrink. They speak less. They share less. They protect themselves by withdrawing. Homes don't break because of conflict. They break because of disrespect. Conflict can be worked through. Disrespect tells us the relationship is no longer worth the effort. And contempt, even in small doses, communicates exactly that. When sarcasm becomes the primary language, sincerity feels risky. Vulnerability feels foolish. Why open your heart when it might be mocked? Why express a need when it may become a punchline later? So people armor themselves. And armored people cannot be intimate. Children are exquisitely sensitive to contempt. They may not understand the words, but they understand the tone. They learn early whether love is safe or conditional, whether mistakes will be met with guidance or ridicule. And those lessons don't stay in childhood, they echo into adult relationships. Many people use sarcasm as a defense. It's a way to express resentment without admitting hurt. It's easier to mock than to say, "That mattered to me." It's safer to joke than to risk rejection. But unspoken hurt does not disappear, it hardens. And hardened hurt becomes cruelty. Removing contempt from a home doesn't mean removing humor. It means choosing kindness over cleverness. It means asking, before speaking, will this bring us closer or push us apart? Will this leave the other feeling seen or small? Respect is not about politeness. It's about dignity. It's the recognition that the person in front of you has an inner world that deserves care. When dignity is protected, even difficult conversations can happen without damage. You can change the emotional climate of a home by retiring just one habit, laughing at each other instead of with each other. Replace it with curiosity, with directness, with language that owns feelings instead of disguising them. It takes courage to be earnest in a world that rewards irony. But homes are built on earnestness, on the willingness to say, "This hurt," instead of hiding behind a joke, on the bravery to be real when being real feels exposed. When contempt leaves, warmth returns, conversations soften, trust rebuilds, people risk showing up again, imperfect and human, but present. And presence is the opposite of evil. Presence is where connection lives. So if you want to protect your home, guard your words, not just from anger or fear, but from mockery that erodes love over time. Because the most sacred spaces are not held together by passion alone, but by respect. And nothing drives darkness out of a home faster than choosing dignity every single day.